Right, morning everyone. Again, thank you for making the time. I hope you're sat somewhere cool. My name's Simon Lansley, so I'm Director of Strategy and Transformation and have oversight for the Fit for the Future programme. And if I can introduce Mickey. Mickey, do you want to say hello?
Yes, good morning everybody. My name is Mickey Griffith and I'm the Programme Director for Fit for the Future.
So Mickey makes it happen, effectively, that's what happens. And I think we're expecting Matt. I can't see Matt Holdaway on the call yet, who's our chief nurse. So we'll just keep an eye, and when he comes, I'll ask him to introduce himself. So I'll just use a couple of slides to provide some of the background, set the scene. You're happy to drop stuff into the chat, so people not comfortable raising questions in a public forum, that's fine. Stick them in the chat, and between me and Aisha, we'll keep an eye on those. And if you are happy, put your hand up and I'll keep an eye on those, and I'm happy to be interrupted as we go rather than talk at you. So but there will be time at the end for Q&A once you've seen everything. So I'm hoping the clue's in the name, isn't it? Fit for the Future 2. So I'm hoping people are familiar with Fit for the Future because we've done Fit for the Future 1 already. I thought I'd start off just with a reminder of our clinical strategy. So again, hoping people are starting to get familiar with this now. So our two-site hospital trust, we will remain a two-site hospital trust for the foreseeable future. And the direction we've agreed is that we wanted Cheltenham General to focus more on planned care and oncology, and Gloucestershire Royal to focus more on emergency care and paediatrics. Really important to say that's not a purist model. So what we're not saying is all planned care at Cheltenham and all emergency care at Gloucestershire Royal, and you see that some of our planned care continues to happen at Gloucestershire Royal, so some of our ENT and some of our spinal surgery, for example, and most of that is to do with the size of the team, so they're too small to stretch across two sites, or we have highly expensive specialist equipment that needs to be located there. And you also see that in our commitment to Cheltenham General A&E. So again, that model remains unchanged. It's the same model that's been in place since 2013 now, which is the consultant-led unit during the daytime and a nurse-led unit overnight. So no changes to that model. But what we try and encourage is, and again, this is not me and Mickey sat in a dark room and saying this is our strategy. This is having had loads of conversations with clinical teams and saying this is how they would want to distribute their services. So when a service comes to us and says, actually, we think there's benefits of splitting ourselves so we can have more reliable access to the facilities on Cheltenham General. And I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that. And again, we think there's benefit in having our emergency services focused at Gloucestershire Royal because there's benefits of being co-located with other services. Then Fit for the Future is the programme that we use to deliver that. So I think, gone are the days 10, 15 years ago where you could just make a decision, move a service between site, and then you'd go out and tell people that that's what you've done. Rightly so, there's now a more robust process that you go through to starts with engagement. So that's what we are in now within Fit for the Future Phase 2. And in that engagement phase, we reach out as broadly as we can, lots of different groups as we can, lots of different methods. So we've done these sessions, we've had Facebook Live sessions, we've been around the county on the bus. We've done some workshop sessions as well. So as many different formats as we can, so we get to hear from as many different people as we can, and particularly those groups that don't necessarily always feel comfortable engaging these. So we've done some great work recently by reaching out to some of our protected characteristics groups to make sure we hear from those groups that can be less heard in these sorts of things. And then depending on what we hear, the feedback that we get from that session determines where we go next. So in phase 1, the majority of the changes went through into consultation because we had some good feedback and some challenges. So we went through to have more of a formal consultation process. And with phase 2, we're not sure what we're going to get yet. So some changes we may be able to go straight into implementation, but some changes we may need to go into formal consultation. So it depends what we hear back from this stage. I think important to say what we mean by centres of excellence, so it can stand a bit jargonly, can't it? What we're not saying is all 35 specialties within our trust are not all going to be individual centres of excellence, but what we are saying is that when you co-locate certain services, then together that can deliver a centre of excellence. So if you imagine for emergency care, if you have all those services that work together to rapidly stabilize, triage, diagnose and treat those patients. And you think, so let's think what that looks like in GRH. So we have our pediatric team there, don't we? We have trauma. We have our acute medical team. Under this model, we would have cardiology, we'd have respiratory, vascular, emergency general surgery, our cardiac cath lab. So all those services that can work together to make sure the patient gets on the right pathway first time and is treated by the right team first time. Where you collectively locate then, and that's the sort of language you say, that can be described as a centre of excellence for emergency care because you have everything you need. And then equally over at Cheltenham General, the same applies to our planned care specialties and our oncology specialties. So these are services that need reliable access to beds, theatres, diagnostics, critical care, because we've booked patients in advance. So we give them a date and they've come in for an operation or they've come in for treatment. And you'll know better than me, what you see sometimes where you have both of those services, planned care and emergency care on the same site, is often the planned care services can sort of feel second best to that, in that they're the ones that end up getting cancelled. Because if you've got a really high acuity patient and there's emergency coming in, then they rightly will take priority in certain cases over those facilities. So the logic is you separate that. So you have those services that can have reliable access. So there's nothing more difficult, is there, in phoning a patient and saying, sorry, we have to cancel your surgery tomorrow. So we're saying if you separate those services, you have more reliable access to, as I said, to theatres, to beds, to diagnostics, to recovery. So we don't end up cancelling surgery and people get the treatment they need. So that's that sort of centre of excellence for planned care and oncology. So try not to think of it as every specialty as a centre of excellence, but it's the grouping of those services together. That's not saying that we don't have some individual centres of excellence, and we encourage our teams, and you can see that through the teams that are particularly active in research and innovation, and you can see that hopefully you've seen some of the recent communications around our robotic surgery programme, and that's a good example of where we've been able to co-locate services. We invest in the right latest kit and equipment because we know it's on the right site, and then we deliver fantastic benefits for patients of Gloucestershire, getting access to the latest treatments. I've said that it's not a purist. Again, just to repeat, if anyone's joined, it's not a purist strategy. It's not all emergency on one site and all planned care on another site. And you see that to our commitment to Cheltenham A&E and other services. And also not limited to acute sites. So some of you may be aware that we recently took dermatology off-site. So we co-located that alongside primary care and community care. That was something the team wanted to do, and they're seeing some great benefits in shared care and shared learning. So there may be some other specialties that actually they don't need the facilities and the kit and equipment of an acute hospital, and actually it'd be better and would be more accessible and perhaps help to reduce some of our health inequalities if they were co-located in Gloucester City, for example, or in Cheltenham Town Centre. So we're looking at some of those opportunities as well. Okay. Just wanted to do a reminder of what was in scope of phase 1, so anyone coming to the programme afresh. So these were the changes that we agreed through in 2021. We had 7 in scope of phase 1, and 5 of those, so the ones with the green eyes next to them, those are the ones that have been implemented. And you can see that the red and blue there is just to pull out, it's the delivery of the strategy. So the red is the more emergency care services and the blue is the planned care services. 2 big ones still left to go. So the centralisation of the acute medical take is planned for the summer of 23. The reason we haven't done that one, it's linked to additional capacity. So you'll be well aware of all the building work that's going on site, which I know can be disruptive, but it's a fantastic thing to see, I think, for the investment that's come into the hospital, over £44 million to deliver that programme. So the acute medical take is dependent on that building programme, as is the what we call the image guided interventional surgery model. So that's another good example of co-location. So that is where interventional radiology, interventional cardiology and vascular surgery are located on the same sites. It's interventional radiology rooms, and it's the cardiac cath labs, and it's a hybrid vascular theatre over at GRH and a hub interventional radiology hub over at Cheltenham General to support urology and oncology, and that one comes online again from summer 23. You'll start to see that come through. So that was the scope of phase 1. This is the kind of branding you're seeing for phase 2. So hopefully some of you have seen some of this come through in the staff comms and the brochures. It is a continuation of our centres of excellence approach. So there's nothing new in terms of the strategy. It's the same separation of emergency and planned care. Slight difference with phase 2. It's not only looking at acute hospital care. So when we talk about diabetes, we talk about frailty, there's some discussions in there about how we support people better in their own homes and get them home quicker, more of that integrated care approach as to only rather than only focusing on the acute element of it. And these are the specialties in scope of phase 2. So again, you'll see more red on the Gloucestershire Royal site and more blue on the Cheltenham General, but not exclusive. So it goes back to my point, it's not all emergency and all planned on either site. So the proposals for phase 2 are for the, and this is talking about inpatient services, so outpatient clinics remain unchanged under these models, but inpatient diabetes and endocrinology over at Gloucestershire Royal. Again, part of that emergency centres of excellence. So there's a strong link with diabetology and vascular surgery, for example, and we've seen some of the benefits of that. Frailty, a different approach to frailty. So there's a model that when the new gallery ward is built, so there's new 28 beds coming into the second floor of gallery ward, and in a good thing that provides 8 new side rooms and 4 bays of fall, and I was visited that last week actually to see how it's doing. It's going to be a fantastic area. People are going to really, it's going to be a bit of a queue, I think, for people who want to work on that area, but it sets a really nice template for what's the art of the possible when we refurbish our wards. So it's going to be a really nice environment to work and to receive care. But that block then, and we've challenged the team to come up with a name for it, so they're going to name it, is that frailty unit, so a frailty assessment unit on the ground floor, 48-hour stay on gallery wing 1, and then up to 72 hours on gallery wing 2, with some direct admit pathways coming in. So colleagues on the line may be familiar with something called synapsis, which is where we have those initial conversations with paramedics or with GPs, for example, and we can route patients to the right place. So for frailty patients, rather than put them through a busy accident and emergency department, which is not always the right environment for those group of patients, we can route them into frailty assessment. So that team can, and we'll have community colleagues in there as well to provide support to get them home or get them back to the right places of care as quickly as possible. So that frailty model is the one on GRH, but also we will retain frailty services on Cheltenham General as well, and frailty, they will have direct admit pathways into those areas and same day emergency care facilities as well. So that's a kind of good example of the sort of mix of red and blues, and blue in the wider sense, they're not planned care in the way that we talk about elective activity, so operations and things, but actually there is an element of planned care to frailty, because we know these patients, some of them bounce in and out because they have acute episodes that they need our services for, and we, with better communication with our GP colleagues and community colleagues, we could manage that pathway in rather than waiting for them to get to really acute, unwell and 999 into our A&E. So that's the sort of planned care element of that. Non-interventional cardiology. So in phase 1, you saw interventional cardiology come across to Gloucestershire Royal. So this is bringing the remaining cardiology across. Again, the part of that centres of excellence, cardiology works really closely with respiratory, with acute medicine. So having them co-located, as the clinical team are really keen to do that one. And same with respiratory. So again, people may be aware we've moved this one already. This was something we did during our response to COVID. So in our response that we wanted to maintain COVID pathways and non-COVID pathways wherever we could, given the nature of that disease, respiratory was centralised onto the GRH site, and they've seen some really big benefits of doing that. They set up a COVID high care unit, which prevented people being deteriorated and being admitted into critical care. Some really strong outcomes. So they did some data analysis and are going to do some research papers on that. So that model, could not only apply to COVID, but it could apply to other respiratory diseases. So they can, the way they can provide that is that they have all the team on one site to give them the 7-day cover. So that was something that they're keen to maintain. And then at Cheltenham General, I talked about frailty, but benign gynecology. So we have gynae oncology is already located at Cheltenham General. So the team wanted to bring the day case surgery across to support that, so that they get the benefit from some of those things I've mentioned. Reliable access to beds, theatres, and recovery. Those of you that are at Cheltenham General have been there, you'll see the new day surgery unit coming out of the ground. So that's now all been cladded up, and then the brickwork starts. So that is a real state of the art, again back to our centres of excellence language, a new day surgery unit that's been designed around the best practice pathways, much better than our Chedworth environment, Kemerton environments that we have had in the past. Annie, you've got your hand up.
Hi Simon, thank you. I was understanding that the gynae surgery is going to go back to 9A at the minute. I'm not sure, is that a temporary type of thing, or is that if the gynae is going to Cheltenham? I don't see how that quite works. Yeah,
so you're right. That's the inpatient element, the emergency inpatient gynae. The bit coming across to Cheltenham is just a day case, so the planned care day case element.
Right. Okay.
So gynae inpatient emergencies will still stay on Gloucestershire Royal, and you're right, onto the 9th floor. But this is the planned care, the day case surgery. So they'll get to take advantage of the new day surgery unit. Stroke is the last one. So stroke, we move stroke across to Cheltenham General again as part of our response to COVID. So that vulnerable group we wanted to keep away from COVID pathways as best we could. They've seen some real benefits of being on that planned care site. So the clinical pathway they've been able to do is, again, through the Synapsis tool, conversations with paramedics. Patients come straight into CT. So they get that immediate CT scan to determine if they are a stroke patient and how severe it is, and then they can use that to determine their pathway, which is to either retain them through our own hazard unit, or if they needed to, some specialist treatment down in Bristol. And obviously there's huge benefits of having the rehab area of that team co-located. So the proposal is for both the hyperacute stroke unit, HAZU, and the acute rehab ward to be located on Cheltenham General. And we're looking at there's a trust down in Kent, in Canterbury, that run this model on their planned care site. So we've used that to inform our thinking. And they've seen some real benefits. And I don't know if we have anyone from the stroke team on, but you'll be aware of the SNAP data, which is the kind of sort of benchmarking tool that we use. And we've seen some real improvements from having stroke on the Cheltenham site in terms of time to CT scan and time spent on a dedicated stroke ward. So the proposal is to maintain that so we can keep those benefits for patients. So those are the services in scope of phase 2. This slide just kind of covers that in a bit more detail. I think I've mentioned most of these points. So as I said, so gynae is the day case, diabetes is inpatients, frailty is the inpatient model, and non-interventional respiratory and stroke is all inpatient care. So I think I'm going to pause there, and maybe if I keep this slide on screen, because that's the most relevant one, and then open up to any questions. So if there's anyone who wants to raise their hand or stick something in the chat, we'll go through. Annie, hi.
Hi, me again. For people who don't know me, I'm a support mentor in medicine, but used to be a ward sister over at Cheltenham General. My slight concern, Simon, and that I put it in any forum, is with the feel of the acute medical take going over more to Gloucester, I'm really concerned about the senior cover and medical cover in Cheltenham, because the patients still get sick there. And Saturday afternoon, 5 o'clock, how many registrars will there be? How is that going to be covered? And I know there's acute care response teams as well, but you actually do need medics as well. And I'm really interested to hear how that will work.
Yeah, great. So I'll ask Mickey to come here. Mickey, maybe describe the group that Alex Dagger-Pyeth is leading.
Yes, good morning, and a good question. So it's front and centre of the making it a safe transition. So there's a group called a cross-divisional working group that's looking at all the changes, assuming that the acute medical take has moved by 23 to look at exactly that point, medical cover. So there's already draft rotas being pulled together, and those will be shared, and then people can sort of test that both internally and externally to feel whether people are happy with that. There's also obviously conversations around the impact with anything around trainees and the deanery. There's impact on availability of diagnostics. So we have to have a fully robust process, and one of the views of that group is that, and I think even from Alex, he was on the call, is that this at least gives a clear opportunity to evidence what that looks like, rather than kind of people sort of assuming things. We'll have that all written up and people can check that. And we are now sort of, I think Timon used the phrase T-minus 11 months. We've got a chunk of time to put that in place, and then people to feel whether they feel that's the right thing or not, and plenty of opportunities to challenge that.
Because, you know, sometimes there's a long delay for patients getting seen. I know you can do that through Datex a bit, but the juniors who are currently there now will be the ones that also will have that sort of information. Are they being approached to see actually how often they're being, you know, almost keeping a little tally of how often they're bleeped, what's this about? I don't know. I presume that sort of stuff's going on.
Yes, I think there's two things. One is to obviously get people's feedback about what's currently happening, but I think as importantly is to indicate what the proposals would be supporting the acute care response team. There's no assumption that that's going to be sufficient, so there's going to need to be additional cover medical support on the GRH, on the CGH site at those times you talk about out of hours, and it's certainly one of the things that the clinical senate, where we are externally reviewed, that's one of the top of their lists, so we have to provide clear evidence around that. So again, we'll share that information. I don't know if anyone's taking notes, but we'll make sure that that's broadened out so that people can see what's proposed, and that's coming together in the next couple of weeks, so it'll soon be able to be made available, and people can review that and see if there's anything that's been missed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mickey. Question from Robin in the chat around the risks associated with potentially separating benign gynae from remaining gynae. So I'll give you the response that when talking to Mark James in the team, and Robin, you might, if there's any risks you've got in mind, then please to speak up. But the one of the key drivers for the changes is when you retain day case surgery, so benign day case surgery on Gloucestershire Royal, at times of peak demand, it's often the day case surgery that gets cancelled. So it's, you know, it's the less acute unwell patients, and they can get trumped in terms of both admissions, but particularly in theatre time. So the team is saying actually benefiting from the new day surgery unit and that whole, it's called the rainbow pathway. Who knew? But there's a rainbow pathway that we've designed the whole day surgery around, and to get reliable access to the day surgery unit, so those patients don't get cancelled, is one of the key drivers. The environment's a lot better over at Cheltenham. It will be for day surgery patients as well, more accessible. So those are the key drivers that the team tell us. Mickey, is there anything else you want to add? And maybe Robin, you might want to come back.
Yeah, it was just obviously the majority, but I think it's clear to say that it's not a 100% shift, so it's that the majority, we kind of see a move of about 80% of activity moving to the Cheltenham side, and recognising that, you know, this last 12 months hopefully won't be a clear sort of example of what the future will look like, but certainly at the moment there's been a halving of the cancellation rate with being on the Cheltenham site. So that's kind of worked through so far.
Does that cover your concerns, Robin, or is there anything particularly you're worried about? No, I see in the chat again, the staff being at thinking the staff being at CGH but needed at GRH. So I think that comes down to the robust job plans, doesn't it? So if people are rotated to be delivering day surgery care, then they're protected to do that on Cheltenham, and the emergency rotas, in the same way that we have standard operating procedures for general surgery, for example, of you know, when a patient deteriorates, we would need to have the same for gynae. But given the main inpatient unit would be on GRH, then I would hope that that the model of support in place to support deteriorating patients would be in place at GRH. Yeah.
But we'll pick that up, and it's helpful that, again, these are useful sessions to have. So we'll capture that, Aisha, and put that forward. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else with hand up? Aisha, have I missed any questions in the chat? Have I missed?
I actually just raised, when we start to pilot the introduction to these ideas that we have right now, how will staff be able to feedback on these introductions, and how can they get in contact with us?
So,
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, so unusually for a program of reconfiguration, as if you look on the slide that Simon's got on the screen, so the diabetes and endocrinology inpatient beds have already moved. So the team, and as Simon introduced it, these aren't ideas that come from us as a program. We only respond to requests from the services themselves. So I had a session with Alison, the lead consultant for diabetes and endocrinology, day before yesterday, and they are very articulate about the benefits, and they've even had some staff survey responses which show that the inpatient team of everybody are the most, I don't know if happy is perhaps the right word, but certainly the metrics, performance, recruitment, retention, well-being, etc. So there's a lot of work in the business as usual element of what we do as a trust that will capture a lot of that. So that's come from diabetes endocrinology. Respiratory, as Simon has said, moved across as part of COVID, so we've now got probably 80% of respiratory inpatients already on the GRH site, and been doing that since June 2020. So again, we've got internal processes within the teams to capture that. As I said earlier, the benign gynecology day case shift has happened, and the stroke has happened. So we've probably got more of a, unusually, as I say, for a reconfiguration program, 4 out of the 5 moves other than interventional cardiology have moved. So there are internal sort of both service teams, medical division, and obviously the trust and as say staff survey plus internal staff reviews. But of course, you know, we need to always, if Craig, and I think I see JB's on the call, perhaps James, whether, you know, we're always looking at opportunities to get both communication with staff, but as a two-way thing, aren't we, James? There's lots of work going on to try and improve that communication, isn't there?
Yeah, and you know, I think we're constantly looking to improve it. So one of the big elements is actually how staff can help shape that with us. So yeah, absolutely take it on board.
Okay, I just moved the slide on to there's a really helpful website if people wanted to take a note.
Sorry, Simon, could I just jump in with another question? Is that all right?
Yeah.
I know there's a rumour going around, I mean, that Gastro now want to go over to Gloucester. I mean, there's a limit to how many, but yeah, that model works well with the side rooms and everything there. So it's tricky, and whether is that control's not the right word. Is that managed by the TRI and the execs, or is it through this process? My just slight concern is there's not going to be enough beds in Gloucester. It's bad enough as it is. So, you know, I don't know. It's looking at seeing what could be spread a little bit more both ways. But I'm just raising something that's a topic at the minute that I'm hearing in the corridors, really. So it's managing all that, isn't it? Yeah.
So this, I think, so reminding us, so gastroenterology were in phase 1 of Fit for the Future. So, you know, that was back in 2018-19, we started those discussions and moved them across to Cheltenham General. So Fit for the Future is our process to deliver reconfiguration. So this is phase 2, and it will run for another 12 months. Right. And so this is the route to deliver reconfigurations and go through that engagement and consultation. I'm aware of those views, and I think they've moved on a bit now. I think there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but yeah. I love our rumour mill. It's great, and things pop up all over the place. But so there's it's not in scope. I would be very surprised, given that we spent a lot of time and effort, and the team came to us with the case and said, this is why we would like to be on Cheltenham General. I'd be very, you know, if we look back at that and say, well, what's changed? I'd be very surprised if there was a strong case to reverse that.
Yeah, if I can also just jump in. So the gastro team were part of the cross-divisional group that Alex leads, and some of that came up, and there's big discussions around direct admits and this kind of stuff. So absolutely, the basis of the programme and the going forward is that it remains where it was, or is rather.
Thanks very much. I'll be doing a ward to board then, ward to board conversation. Thank you very much.
Good. Catherine?
Yeah, sort of following on from Annie's question about gastro and that sort of flick across between sites, and then staff saying, oh, actually, we'd like to go back to another place, go back you know, to Gloucester or Cheltenham, wherever it might be. I'm just picking up on the stroke elements, because we've obviously gone out to engage and consult around shifting stroke from Gloucester to Cheltenham, and then from Cheltenham to Gloucester previously, and now we're going back the other way. I guess what's our kind of mitigation for avoiding these conversations again, because they seem to happen fairly regularly, and we had a purpose-built space for stroke in Cheltenham, which we then moved everything to Gloucester, and then we're going back again. So I just kind of wanted to ask specifically about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, Mickey, you've been part of that working group. Do you want to?
Yeah. So I think what we have to recognise is that things do move on. So there's some of the things around the location. So I think the key things for if you take stroke as an example, so the co-location of the hyperacute, the HASU, and the acute stroke, the ASU, is something which was a key part of the previous consultation, that bringing those together, and that's obviously been part of national policy. The expectation that you have to have a hyperacute unit on your emergency site is probably sort of an expectation, but there are parts, you know, there's innovations happening across the country in pockets where that's changed. So the team have looked, as Simon mentioned, Canterbury and a few other models, and certainly one of the areas where you know, new thinking comes in, and again is around this, you know, the ED as the only entrance into the hospital is clearly not the right one, and therefore these direct admits into almost the CT. And talking to Kate Hellier this week, you know, they're even getting part of the thrombolysis kind of process taking place in the CT process. So I think it's, you know, we don't want to be nailing things never changing, and I think that's the, you know, as things develop, and I think when we say, you know, staff, obviously we've got thousands of staff and there are probably thousands of opinions, as we know, and it's really trying to and ultimately respond to the clinical evidence, I think would be Kate's view, and be adaptive, but we don't want to be changing every 5 minutes, because I think it's very confusing for staff, and we want to have things settled as much as we can, and I think having the strategy is really clear. It's not, as Simon says, not a purist strategy, but the direction of travel has kind of been set out for some time. So I think that's really where things land, and we are seeing clear benefits. I mean, from phase 1 with the emergency general surgery, centralisation has had a huge impact on the risks that we have, and in the service improvement. We found that with vascular, obviously they're not quite where they want to be ward-wise, so it's not as good as it should be, but it will get there in the next 12 months, and the kind of ward and bed numbers, you know, will be settling. So I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but I think it's trying to have an open mind, but not have it changing our minds every 5 minutes, I think would be difficult for staff.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more? I just signpost you to earlier in the chat, James dropped in the link to Get Involved Gloucestershire. So if you're able to scoot up and copy that, paste that into your browser, that gives you a lot more information. You can access some of the other events that we've done, and there's a link to the survey on there as well, which closes at the end of the month. So it'd be great to get people's feedbacks on all 6 of these different proposals. Again, things you may not be happy doing an open forum, so if you're concerned about things, drop that into the survey, or if you think we've missed out some benefits or there's other things we need to think about, then drop that into that as well, and we'll listen and hear all those comments. All right, I think we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Well done.